Hello, and welcome to my presentation on refugee history. Lately, I've been hearing a lot about refugees across the news and on the internet. I knew that if I got enough historical data that I would probably be able to understand a little more about what is happening and why it's happening. All the data presented here is coming from the UNHCR website, which is the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. The site offers all types of data, specific or general, pertaining to refugees. I'll begin with a dashboard where we can see a timeline of all the population types and also where those populations of people were going by looking at the world map at the same time. The closer to red, the higher the number of people that went to that country, and the lower counts are in gray. We see here that there are 7 categories of populations. We'll start with the largest one. We can see on the area timeline here that the refugee population has been present throughout history, or at least going back to 1951. A refugee is any person who is in fear of being persecuted for reasons of race, religion, nationality, membership of a particular social group, or political opinion, and is outside the country of their nationality. This population type really started growing after 1973. The majority of these people during the 70s and 80s went to Iran and Pakistan. This is why we see these two countries in a darker shade of red. They migrated due to the Soviet Union invading the country and taking over. Then we have internally displaced persons. They are people or groups of individuals who have been forced to leave their homes, in particular as a result of or in order to avoid the effects of armed conflict, violence, violations of human rights, or natural or man-made disasters, and who have not crossed an international border. Colombia especially was impacted here because of a civil war between the Colombian government, paramilitary groups, crime syndicates, and left-wing guerrillas such as the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia. All the parties engaged in the conflict have been criticized for numerous human rights violations. The next population down the list is the returnee population. This is now a much smaller group than the previous two. They are former refugees who have returned to their country of origin spontaneously or in an organized fashion, but are yet to be fully integrated. You notice here that not that many countries are highlighted. This is for 2 reasons. 1, it is a much smaller population now dispersed, and 2, there is a spike from 1970 to 1973. The countries here are actually unknown, so we cannot see them on the map. Then we have the stateless persons. They are not considered as nationals by any state under the operation of its law. In other words, they do not possess the nationality of any state. An example is Thailand. These people came from North Korea, China, Vietnam, Pakistan, and Burma. The problem in Thailand, however, is that many of them go there because Thailand is a source, transit, and destination country for human trafficking. Then we have returned IDPs. This refers to those internally displaced persons who were beneficiaries of UNHCR's protection and assistance activities and who returned to their areas of origin during the year. An example is the Democratic Republic of Congo. The displacement crisis began with the influx of over 1 million Rwandan Hutu refugees and militants in 1994. This led to civil war from 1996 to 1997, which reignited in 1998 and ended in 2003. This is why we see a slow climb after 2003. Others of concern refers to individuals who do not necessarily fall directly into any of the groups above, but to whom UNHCR extends its protection. Russia is a country in this category. And finally, we have the asylum seekers. These are individuals who have sought international protection and whose claims for refugee status have not yet been determined. Today, this category, at least in the United States, offers political asylum to some LGBT individuals who face potential criminal charges. Now let's take a look at the data a little differently. For example, which continental regions experienced the most refugee intake? The dataset we have looked at has 197 recognized countries. But what general part of the world did people go to? We'll start with a Tableau story to show some of this data. Especially starting in the mid-1970s, we can see a climb in all types of refugees for all continental regions. Asia, Africa, and the Americas have seen the most increase in refugees in the 63-year period. When we look at the others, we see that Europe, Oceania, and the null category have seen a slight decline, especially after 1993. This particular data set does not show 2015 or 2016, but based on some recent activity, especially in Europe, the numbers in these areas may have risen. Now let's take a closer look at each of the population types as defined by the UNHCR. I wanted to see, well, is there really a small set of countries that have these refugees, or are they evenly distributed across the world? Starting with the largest category, the refugees, we see that the top 5 countries are Pakistan, Iran, United States, Germany, and Congo. The percentages above each bar indicate the percent of the total data set. So in this time frame, about 25% of all refugees went to these 5 countries. And about 13% of all IDPs went to Colombia, Iraq, Congo, Sudan, and the Syrian Arab Republic. In other words, these 2 populations make up roughly 38% of all types of refugees. And across all 7 categories, we tend to see some of the same countries in the top 5. So it is one thing to ask, where did everyone go? And it's another to ask, well, where did they come from? This is a short story focusing on the origins of the people. Here I created a text visualization. These are the top 20 origins of nations from the same 63-year period. The size of the font indicates the sum of the refugees. We can see that most came from Afghanistan and several others that were actually unknown. Doing some research on the history, it turns out that people who left from Afghanistan, especially in the late 80s and early 2000s, went over to their neighboring countries of Pakistan and Iran. From the previous story, we saw these 2 as the top 2 nations of asylum, which now makes more sense. I then wanted to get a quick snap of time of the history of all these refugees leaving their countries. Where did all this start and where did it end? With this visualization, you can see the expansion of size and geographic locations across the world from 1951 to 2014. The countries shown closer to red indicate a higher number of refugees leaving from that country. We'll soon see India turn red. That was in 1971 due to the Indo-Pakistani War. Also notice that Afghanistan stays a light pink for a majority of this animation. A big part of this is the history of violence in the nation and people fleeing for that reason. Also, in the United Arab Emirates, many people fled because of labor issues and the result of amnesty programs. The other country that will turn red is Colombia. It was between 1996 and 2003 that almost 1.6 million Colombians left the country voluntarily, primarily as a result of the internal social conflict. Colombia has both voluntary migration and forced migration. So there was a quick historic view. I think this visualization helps us realize in about 60 seconds just how global this movement is and also the reason why almost every country today is so diverse. And finally, from here, I wanted to know some more specific information about the demographics of this movement. Are these people seeking asylum mostly young, mostly old, and where are they primarily going? I connected to a different data source which also came from the UNHCR website. The data is only collected for the years 2001 to 2014. So what I noticed first is that the data is broken down quite a bit for age groups and for male and female. So what I did was I created a few calculated fields to get the ages 0 to 17 together. I also added males and females together for each age group, and I still kept the age groupings of the original data set. Let's focus first on the bottom chart. When I select these new measures for each age group, we see that besides the unknown category in gray, the highest is the age group 18 to 59 in green. The line on the very bottom is people 60 years old and older, which has stayed fairly consistent. But when I deselect 0 to 4, 5 to 11, and 12 to 17, and just select 0 to 17, we see that actually after 2010, there were more young children and teenagers than there were adults. I found this very interesting. Up top, I have the average number of refugees by country for the 3 age groups I'm interested in. So for each category, I can quickly see the top country average and on the bottom, the actual counts of that country that I selected. For example, the top country for the 0 to 17 group is Myanmar. Okay, the top country for the 18 to 59 age group is Germany. So many people went to Germany in a relatively short time, only from 2010 to 2014. And third, we have the 60 plus age group, okay, where the highest average is also going to Germany. And finally, the age group I was most curious about is the youngest age group, children from 0 to 17 years old. On this dashboard, I have a map, and we can select a range to see where most of the refugee children traveled. I set my range here to increments of 1.5 million. The darker green countries indicate a higher amount. We see Ethiopia here with most, but also several other countries. As we move the same range across from about 1.5 million to 3 million, we'll see a more concentrated region. So about there, children going to just Myanmar, Iraq, Chad, Yemen, and Kenya. Now moving the slide across again from 3 to 4.5 million. So about there, we see just Somalia. Then from 4.5 million to 6 million, we have children going to the Democratic Republic of Congo. And now 6 million to 7.5 million. So about there, we have children going to Afghanistan. Okay, and now we'll move it all the way to the end. And if I extend it to the largest number, we'll now see that even more than Afghanistan is Pakistan. A big reason these two are the top makes sense because they're neighboring countries and both have had historically and continue to have lots of conflict and violence. So there was my presentation on refugees around the world and a little bit of history. I know I learned a few things in the process of just looking at this data, and I hope you did as well.